a science funder. Thank you for joining despite the time pressures with COVID. Jill Hallam is Professor of Library and Information Science she used to be at Queensland University of Technology. She is now in Melbourne. Sorry, my iPad just packed up with all my notes. That's unfortunate. You are in committees with both IFLA and the ALIA, Australian Library Information Association, on education of librarians. Thank you very much for joining in the evening in Australia. Michael Jeckel is Professor for Sociology and President of the University of Trier. And he is also a member of the Research Council for Information Infrastructures, which is a kind of committee of the Joint Science Conference in Germany. And he's been the lead author of that, in my view, very important white paper, Digital Competencies Urgently Needed. And Rudolf Mumenthaler is still director of the Central and University Library in Lucerne and will be the founding director of the new Zurich University Library from 1st of January. He's also professor of library information science at both Zurich and Chur. And he is involved with BiblioSwiss, the Swiss Library Association, on the education committee. Well, thank you very much for joining. And you will all get an opportunity to briefly say why you are here and what your interest in the topic is with the first question. What is your interest? Why are you here? Who wants to go first on this one?
Ladies first, Jill.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I've got a few different hats that I wear in the space of this discussion. As an academic, to start with, here in Australia, I've developed and run 8-week or 12-week programs in research support services for academic and special libraries. This goes back to 2014, so quite a number of years ago that we've started doing this. And it's an interesting program where it can be aimed at library students, but then also, so credit-bearing course, but then also for practitioners as well to upskill in a new area. And so that's been run across Australia as an online program, and we've had a number of students in that area. As a consultant, my interest is in workforce planning and skills development across Australia. So public libraries, academic libraries, special libraries, government libraries, the whole lot. So I'm sort of immersed in that sort of skills area, if you like. But I sort of went back on one contract as a practitioner to the University of Queensland, which is a major research university. And my role there was to develop the information and digital literacy strategy for the whole university. And that encompassed the research community as well as the teaching and learning community there. And as you mentioned, with my professional hat on, then I'm chair of the Education Advisory Committee of the Australian Library and Information Association. And I'm chair of the Continuing Professional Development and Workplace Learning section of the International Federation of Library Associations. So basically, I'd say this topic is in my DNA. It's very, very relevant to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who wants to speak next?
You want, I can continue. Good morning to our audience. I'm Michael Jeckel. I'm the president of Trier University, a university with, I would say, modern library, and it's a central library. So we don't have libraries in the departments. There are some, but they are of minor importance. So it's very important for us to develop this institution, because the library is still, let's say, the heart of a university. And if this institution is not up to date, the science around this institution might also not be up to date. So that's the first interest in the topic we are discussing today. The second one, you already mentioned me, or you introduced me as a lead author of the paper about the digital skills we are in need on different levels in our academic areas. Well, at the end, it was a group of writers, as always. So in the beginning, you can line out the strategy of a paper, but in the end, there are a lot of different interests coming together, and such a paper is always has something of a compromise. But the idea of the paper was to focus the attention on changing demands in the field of science itself, but also in the field of scientific support. And 18 years ago, one author was writing a beautiful sentence. I would like to quote it at the beginning. Far from libraries being displaced by information technology has moved into libraries. That's right, but at the same time, the need for scientific support is more than just moving some IT facilities from one point to another one. And I would suggest that we should discuss this new demands, especially for upcoming scientists. So what have they, what are the skills they need? What are the facilities they need to be successful in third-party funding projects and so on? And I would say that there must be a new collaboration between the classical IT services and the libraries as we know it from the past and as they should be developed in the future.
Thank you. Matthias, do you want to go
next? Yeah, so basically I have three interests. As a teacher in a medical school, I believe that medicine is a fast moving field and doctors should be equipped with the skills that they need to keep up to date. So I'm all in favor of really making information science an important topic in the curriculum in the medical studies. My second interest is because I'm interested in meta-analysis and systematic reviews, is in information science as a research tool. And my third, as a funder, is more on the development of open access to journals and the wish of funders that what they support is made publicly available to society. These are, funds that are contributed by society through taxpayers' contributions, and what is being done with these funds in research should also become publicly available. In this context, at the Swiss National Science Foundation, we have a small research group which looks into issues around open access with a focus on predatory journals, which I think is a very important but difficult development. There are also journals in a gray zone, and that really is something we are struggling with at the Swiss National Science Foundation. Should we fund, publication fees, APCs for what journals, what open access journals, and how can we promote open access? Over.
Thank you.
Thank you then. It's me. I can also say there are three levels of interest. I would start with the board of BiblioSwiss, of the Swiss Library Association. We started with the development of education strategy, and we try to get the whole picture of the whole educational system in our field, and not only academic, but also all kind, and also further education. So that I hope we get some input also for this strategy. On the second hand, I'm a teacher, and in different courses, I'm also a member of the steering committee of the master program at University Zurich in library science. And there we discuss also these questions and what kind of training programs can we offer, what do we need? And now it was created as Certificate of Advanced Studies in Data Management and Technologies. So this is another part. And third, I will be director of this University Library of Zurich, and we have a lot of these questions, of course, there to solve. We will take the library stuff out of the institutes and bring it into the system of the library. So there are new interfaces that we need, new formats, and we have to discuss about the roles of the scientific staff and the roles of the librarians. That will be a great task in the next year.
Thank you very much. Let me move to the first content question, really. Why are we here? What has really changed in science that makes that border between research and information?
Bonjour, hello.
Sorry? What makes that border between research and information blur? And I would quite like to let Michael start with this question because you raised it in your white paper.
Okay. So let me begin with the experience at my local university here in Trier. When I'm asking the director of the library, and she's part of the audience today, welcome, then she will tell me that the number of users in our library is still high, and the number of users that are lending books is still very high. But if you ask a young scientist what kind of publication he would prefer for his final thesis, he has the option of making it in a kind of a classical book, but he can do it much more elaborate with some visualization and some databases and so on. So the idea of what is a publication has changed tremendously. And additionally, the competitors of a library when it comes to a publication has grown too. So there are, a library can be successful in offering some bibliometrics, but there are other institutions outside the library that are also able to offer bibliometrics. So there is a new competition field when it comes to the reputation structures of modern science. And I think this is one central reason for thinking about what skills do we need in the field of the library itself. What are the convergence fields between the classical IT services and the library, and what has to be done in the science field itself so that they are able to fit all the needs that, for instance, Matthias Egger come from the third-party funding institutions who, for instance, ask for long-term archive techniques and all the things we know from the current discussions. So, and that's a new situation. There is not only the Fachreferent for a special discipline. We need new skills, but until today we have not a very concrete idea how we should call these new professions. There are a lot of candidates like data librarian, data curator, but the central question is, what is the idea behind these new skills or these new professions, and where is a study program that makes young people, that enables young people to fulfill the idea behind these new qualifications.
Do the others want to add or have different opinions on that development?
Principally, I agree. And the questions also from the library side which can be our role in these new developments. We see some kind of a need. There is a need of new skills. Science is changing, and we are asking ourselves what can be our role in the future. And I guess it's very important to talk together, to be in exchange with the scientists and to define the roles, so that we offer more an infrastructural service, but we have to know much more about technologies, about data management, data science than before, in order to talk to the scientists, in order to know what they need, and so that scientists can focus on their job, doing science, doing research. And so I have no model for that, but I think it's very important to discuss it, and maybe different branches, different topics have also different needs and different possibilities. So it's not a one-size-fits-it-all model that we are looking for, but some different kind of models that can be adapted in this specific situation.
Jill?
If I can, yes, give some Australian perspectives on this. The research intensive libraries here have been, I suppose, more focused for many, many years on service delivery, of working with clients rather than being collection focused. In the immediate sort of sense of research support, as an umbrella term for the discussion today, the academic libraries have adopted and adapted the research life cycle model, and therefore they engage with researchers at every point on the research life cycle, from ideas generation right the way through the process of research, and then through to publication, and as you were talking about, research impact, so output and impact, and very much in that technological space of altmetrics, of using social media in different ways in terms of the way that researchers communicate with the wider community. I should probably sort of preface some of that by saying at the high level, government policy has quite a bit to do with this in the first place. So the funding bodies themselves, as we, Matthias will be talking about, I'm sure, the funding bodies have certain expectations, and the libraries, the academic libraries, have worked with the researchers to be able to meet those expectations and deliver on those services. So there's many different angles, but I'd say, we also have a government policy which is on the impact, demonstrating the impact of research, the translation of research into real life. And there again, the government has expectations, the funding bodies have expectations, and therefore, the academics have not been able to do it on their own. The library has been that central point to pick up on all the requirements and to work with those people. Having said that, we are not locked into a profession, that it is only librarians who work in libraries. We have other professions drawn from other areas. So University of Queensland, for example, the Director of Research and Learning is an astrophysicist. And she's come that research route and has moved into the library, bringing the university's research agenda with her into the library. So I won't dominate the conversation from that, but I think we have a number of different approaches to this problem, which we can do in a younger, more flexible country, perhaps.
I very much like, Jill, your idea of the research life cycle. Mm-hmm. I think that also helps to define the skills that the people who accompany academics on this journey need to have. And I think there quite massive changes are required compared to how librarians were were being trained even 5 years ago. From a funding perspective, we acknowledge the input, the help by the information science community in order to avoid the word librarians, which is clearly no longer capturing what these people are doing. We also have helped them, for example, by developing a web-based application together with partners at Dimensions, which is a company, a sort of a science information company, and at Unpaywall, which is another such company, where in Switzerland you can enter the name of a researcher and you will get his or her output, and you will get a graph which shows how many of these papers are open access, what type of open access, gold, green, etc. And it gives a list of those who are not open access by date of publication, which helps librarians to quickly see what publications, according to the copyright rules that a publisher or a journal has, could be made open access very quickly, because they are, beyond that perhaps 1 year or 6 month embargo period. And that has had some effect. I don't know how many people on this call are aware of this, but I'm going to put the link in the chat. By the way, if you have questions, Gerard, I hope you don't mind me saying this. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. This instrument, this application, will probably become available worldwide in a few weeks. So we are talking to Dimensions and Unpaywall to make it basically accessible to everyone. And I think this could help your community, but also the academic community, to increase the open access proportion of output that is open access. So I'll stop here. Over.
Thank you. Now, a range of new functions of people working in the library have been mentioned already, to do with open access publishing, to do with systematic searching. What range of roles do you see emerging? Well, Michael, do you want to start?
Yeah. Perhaps you should start at let's say the basic expectations one might have when he is talking about a library in a classical sense. So what the classical user expects that, well, there is a catalog, there are some search engine machines, and I'm able to find the text or the book or the source I need for a very specific purpose. Some people like a library just as a third space atmosphere. That's very important, and it's of growing importance. Our colleague from Dresden, Axel Bonte, used the expression of the Starbucks effect for the modern library. But at the same time, he was questioning there must be more than just a Starbucks effect. But I think this atmosphere is a very important point. But orientation is far more important. So if I look at the high-level institutions we are installing, for instance, on the national and European level, I just give you two. The one I already mentioned is the data infrastructure for several disciplines. The same is happening on the European level with the European Open Science Cloud. There is the Gaia X project to run something like a huge open source experiment to become more independent from commercial players in the field we are discussing today. And now there is a young scientist who would like to start in this very complex world. And if there is no one at a university, I don't think that the shareholder is able to give him all the advices he is in need of when he would like to work in this new networked surroundings. And I think that at this point we do no longer talk about the librarian, but someone who is able to give to bring him through all these opportunities that are given in his discipline. And I think the classical library has in some part has to change his services to be the most important point of service where you can find the information you need. How can I work with all these new things that are actually being developed on the national and European level? And they all have to do with information or with some archiving techniques or with semantic web technologies and so on. And for a young scientist, that's normally something totally new. At the same time, it is expected that he should be able to work with all these new facilities.
Thank you. Maybe I can add something. And there's also an interesting discussion in the chat about the librarian term. So I'm more with libraries. I agree. We try to redefine all the time the term library, and we are always looking for new tasks also of libraries. So maybe it's also with the librarian, but I'm not so. I can also accept if we talk about different terms, not librarian, but information scientist, for example. So, but what I wanted to say, you asked, Gerhard, the new roles, new tasks, what is changing? I think Matthias told also about the copyright questions. So legal aspects are very important, and I see that most researchers have difficulties to understand all the different aspects of the copyright questions. So we need copyright specialists, legal specialists in the library. For example, we have also the whole publishing process. We must understand that we have to give advice. We have to be able to give advice to researchers, to young researchers, how they can publish, where they can publish, so that it's according to the definition or requirements of the funding bodies, for example. So there is a lot of new tasks there, and we have to try to, so not everybody has to know everything, but in the library we need people that are specialists on that, and that's also the question how the Fachreferat maybe and the traditional role of a subject librarian can develop. I know libraries that are dealing with that because they have a lot of traditional working subject specialists, and they try to go into these new fields, and we have other situations where the these data librarian or liaison librarian, for example, are already very well integrated into the institutes and research teams. So not all the libraries have the same situation today, but both or all have to move somehow in this direction.
Do these new roles have to be in the library, or could they also be in the academic departments?
Oh, yeah, can you directly answer, because it's the question with these liaison librarians or embedded librarians. So that's the difference, as I understand it. We have on the one hand the model that librarians are integrated into the research teams as an embedded librarian, or we have one that is more connected to the library but has a close contact to the researchers as a liaison librarian. So I think both models are possible.
Mm-hmm. For example, in my institute, we have embedded librarians, I think about 2 FTEs, but we have to pay them ourselves from our institutional budget. It's not coming out of the central library budget, if you like, but it's really worth it. So, yeah.
Well, I would say that in the future we will still have very different user experience with the topic we are discussing right now. And if there is someone who is up to date with all the new facilities and software programs and so on, well, that's okay. That has been in the past, and this will be in the future. But I think as an institution, you are in charge of installing more than one service who is able to recommend different academic disciplines in the questions we are discussing right now. And this is then a little bit more than just being a librarian. There are still activities that are near to the classical profile of a librarian. But in addition to that, and because of the changing habits to publish the results of a scientific project and the options you have for publishing the results, it need not be a book. It can be like a digital platform where you can put together different things, your research data, your hypothesis, your method, your and so on and so on. So it must not be a text or a book alone. And at this point, as in the beginning, when we start with publication platforms for the first final thesis of the students, we should develop new services that enable especially the upcoming scientists to address their results to a specific audience in a very, let's say, successful way, so that it has something of a professional presentation, you know.
Jill, you wanted to add something?
Thank you. My sort of thoughts were here in Australia, how it's been both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. So the national infrastructure around data management, data curation, etc., that all kicked off around 2008. So we've got sort of a bit of experience in that area, and the funding from the federal government was to the scientific agencies, the research agencies, and the research universities to work together. And so it was divided up into major projects, and different universities and different research agencies worked together. And the library staff at those research universities were directly involved in those high-level projects and learnt the journey as the journey they were traveling. And they're still there at the very high level of the national infrastructure situation here in Australia. And they've developed then communities of practice within the library. They run training, they run sort of summits on skills, they do all sorts of things. So that's then allowed the conversation to start at the grassroots level as well, and that they can sort of, the librarians can then work and interact with these people. I've met them at conferences, and it's just been a really good opportunity for librarians to see a different role that they can actually play, and take that back to their institutions and impact, have some change that way as well.
Thank you.
Just Matthias Egger just wrote in the chat that the embedded librarian should be the better option than to put this service into a central library. I agree, but if you don't have local libraries at your university, for instance in Trier we have a central library, so you can think about an embedded librarian in a discipline like psychology or sociology or geosciences, but there must be, I think there must be a link to the central library, because that's normally, well, you do not need to think about the place where the library is, because there is no longer a need to move into the building although we do a lot for making these buildings very attractive for the users, but there is no real need to move into the library. So it depends on the structure you have at the university. If we are talking about local initiatives, if we are talking about the national initiative, we might come to a different result.
That leads on to the question of structure. You know, if these new roles are that are in information but contribute to research and education, are they still part of the library structure? And how does that dichotomy between library and research units work? How do these people keep in touch with science, with developments in their discipline, while they are part of the library infrastructure, part of reporting lines in the library and so on? How do we resolve that? There's one suggestion in the chat from Helge Knüttel that librarians should be active researchers themselves.
I think also that it's important that librarians who want to support publishing processes, they should publish themselves. They, for example, also work in the publishing process as a peer reviewer or run a platform, and so we need the experience in order to be able to advise other people, for sure. But you asked about the structure, and I think we sketched it a little bit. So that's one model with the embedded librarian that is integrated into an institute, and on the other hand, we have a model of a liaison librarian that is in the central library more, but he's slightly connected to the researchers. So I think it depends of the situation. It can be ideal, like Matthias described it, in an information scientist integrated into a research team that is responsible to get the latest information, latest scientific information about the topic, or more somebody who's close to the researchers, who knows their needs and bring it back to the central library in order to develop their new services.
Michael?
Well, I would say that the distance between the classical IT department and the demands of a scientist in a discipline is higher than the distance between a librarian who is near to one of these disciplines when it comes to the question, what is the need for our future purposes we are facing, we have. So if we do not focus on the term librarian, I would say there is some evidence for installing these new services if they are more content related in the former librarian context. And if it is more about IT security, about storage systems, about connectivity, it has to be more in the IT department. When we're going back to the beginnings of computers and networks at universities, what happened in the 1980s? We had the situation that some of the departments, especially the computer science department, decided we need our own VAX cluster to be independent of our central IT department institution. And at the end, you had the problem that there was no clear agreement about who is in charge of repairing or caring for all these hardware infrastructure. So in the 1990s, all these VAX cluster strategies were some way rolled back, and then they disappeared. And we went back to the idea of central institutions. And now we are at a point where we need new links between central institutions and the scientific disciplines. This can be in the way how Matthias Egger recommended it, try to embed some new expertise in the discipline itself, or make it in the already existing institutions? That's the question we are discussing right now.
Mm-hmm.
In the back there is still a discussion about this is my institution and I don't want to give up any employees to another department in my institution. That's also happening. That's not a theoretical thing we are discussing. There are interests involved.
Yeah, Florian remarks in the chat that on a very basic level, librarians often don't get paid time to do research and publish something. And other problems on the very practical side are the grading, the organizational chart. Where do you put a high caliber scientist whom you've managed to attract to a library post? How do we go about all these practical issues when we introduce a new level of posts that are attractive to researchers in our infrastructure units like library, data center, or IT?
I'm just reading the interesting point of Joan Bartlett that in Canada, academic librarians generally have faculty status.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is very, very seldom, as I know it, in the German context. And one of the recommendations of the paper, of the white paper you mentioned at the beginning, was that we should think about making something like this. It was not a recommendation to say that in the future the director of a library has to be a professor. This was not the recommendation. It goes more in this direction, that academic librarians are also part of the discipline they are in charge for.
Well, with your paper, you went further. If I just may summarize that for the audience, you recommended that qualification posts for academics be created in the library. So, temporary postdoc or PhD posts, and that there could be professorships within libraries to supervise those junior academics. What do the others think about that? Woody, you as a library director.
It's an interesting question, I would say. It's not so easy, I guess, to come there, but we have to consider it maybe. So I know in Zurich is at the moment a discussion about creating a new professorship connected to all these. But I think it would be outside the library system. It would be part of the faculty. So it's still this difference. So we make the difference between faculty and library, and so that could be a long way to go to get there, so that librarians are part of faculty. But I think it's important to consider it.
I think it would be a very effective way of strengthening information science. So I would be very much in favor. How exactly where you would position it, but it would have quite some impact and really give this discipline a good push, and also establish its own research identity and research field within a university. And of course it would open collaborations with many other faculties and disciplines. So I would be very much in favor of that. Having said that, I think the probability of this happening in Switzerland quickly is very small, for reasons I can explain, but you get the message.
Just from my perspective, I was an embedded professor in the library. So I came in as a library science academic, and I worked within a different university library to work on this information and digital literacy strategy. And it was very powerful, because I could knock on the doors of other professors and say, hello, I'm the professor from the library. And that would sort of like make them sort of stop and go like, there's a professor in the library? What? And a lot was around the teaching and learning side of information literacy, which Matthias, you sort of mentioned doctors need the information skills. And the librarians are working very closely on that sort of side of things. So, but at the same time, we worked with the senior researchers as well around their understanding of data literacy as well. So it was definitely a way to open the doors and have sort of communication between the academic faculties and the research institutes and the library itself. So it can be done.
Should we go for it? And if so, how? Matthias, you are skeptic.
No, I think the model, Jill's experience is interesting, that you could perhaps also have a scheme where people who are like me, who are interested in information science, but with a very specific background, for example, in meta-analytic research, spend 6 months in the library and do methodological research with the people there. So sort of a sabbatical where you sort of rotate in and out, and you strengthen within the university the exchange between information science and other disciplines, content sciences. That might also be a model. But I think, as I wrote in the chat, I think that the comparison with statisticians is actually quite interesting, because statisticians also have been considered sort of auxiliary, folks. They help the real scientists. They're not scientists, they help the scientists. And I think this is changing. I think the statisticians are ahead of this. But for example, in the medical faculty at my university, we still do not have a chair in biostats, which is crucial. It's absolutely crucial to have that. Zurich has it, other perhaps a bit less conservative or also better resourced, I don't know, universities in Switzerland do have chairs in biostatistics, but I think there are only very few. So I think this comparison is interesting, and perhaps we could learn from the experience in biostats. Over.
Woody, is that something that we could, that you could incorporate in the education strategy of BiblioSwiss?
I think I understand the question. No, it's 2 steps ahead again. I guess at the moment the debate in Zurich is to get the library staff out of the institutes and bring it to the library system. And so we will have many discussions about what is library work and what is scientific work. So at the first, I think we have to separate in order to clear the situation. And so it can be a step later on to get back and to see it more integrated. At the moment, it's a discussion about a separation of these tasks due to the situation and to the reorganization of the whole system. But I see that there could be a way to not totally separate it, but to see it as an entity, this task, and that librarians and academics work closer together and not in 2 separate systems. And maybe then we get also academics in the library, and then the other side, librarians as an academic staff, scientific staff in research teams.
Mm-hmm. I think that when we start with, let's say, pilots in this field, there will be a new discussion about is that what people are doing in this area? Does this belong to science or is it administration? This is not a minor question, because when it comes to the structure of a senate of a university, or if you look at the architecture of a university, so who is represented in the most important institution of a university, then this discussion is far from being trivial. So then how do we represent this new part of a university that is in need of reaching the goals of a university. The white paper distinguishes between the administration part of services, then the classical PhD holders who are in their qualification process, so the scientific co-workers, and the third one is a growing area that are offering research-related knowledge or facilitate research collaboratively and so on and so on. And that's the new part. We know about it, but they are so far not represented in a German Senate. They are between the lines. If it comes to decisions, they do not exist because they are not represented.
Mm-hmm.
And if you change the architecture of a university, you also have to change the power relations in a university too.
Yeah.
It's like in the beginning of the didactics discussion. Everyone was thinking, I'm not in need of didactics. I am a professor, and so I'm a good I'm good in didactic. And today we have approximately 10 professors only in charge of making lessons about what is a good didactic in biology, geography, epidemiology, and so on. And maybe in some years we will have not on the level of chairs, but perhaps on a postdoc level, we have more people that are in charge of data service, archiving, semantic web technologies, and all the things we are discussing at the moment. And this will be a new group at the university.
Well, Helge and Matthias are pointing towards ways to basically force or enforce the position of librarians, statisticians, and the like, by making the collaboration essential for grant applications and the like. You know, if you require a grant application to be supported by systematic literature search or by statistics or so, then these specialists gain importance within the research infrastructure. Is that the way forward? Basically, requirements from funding bodies?
I mean, that can certainly help. In Switzerland, the Science Foundation pushed for the establishment and also co-funded together with the universities in clinical medicine, the establishment of clinical trial units. And that has definitely improved the quality of clinical research in Switzerland and has also created job opportunities for statisticians, not at the professorial level, but still, you know, highly qualified statisticians are working in these CTUs. By the way, also some information scientists are working in some of these CTUs because meta-analyses are also a study design that is being supported by these units. So yes, I think that is a way where funders can push for change and facilitate change. I think in information science it would probably mostly go through the open access route, where some funding could help libraries from you know, funders like the SNSF could help to push change forward regarding open access, because that is really an agenda that many funders are now pushing hard and also putting money into it. Over.
Mm-hmm. Michael?
One of the recommendations in the white paper of the from the council I'm working with was to install some awards for innovative data services and collections. So to increase the visibility of the things that are already happening in or outside of libraries.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is also one puzzle, small puzzle in the process to develop all the ideas we are discussing.
So we see it at the moment with open access, and I think it's a very strong element of this whole politics. And we have in the open access week another award of the most open research at the university. So that can be a part of the whole initiative that we given such an award that could be possible. Yes. And I agree also to Matthias that open access, open science is very important in this field, and it opens also a lot of possibilities for librarians.
Shall we finally have a look at the route, how we get to where we need to get, and that includes training paths. At the moment, there are no specialist programs to train up people with either an information science or a discipline background in things like research data management or systematic searching, digital humanities or so. There's just a lack of such specialist training programs, except for the odd little course or so. There are also no clearly defined professional role profiles, and there are not even competencies frameworks at the ACRL or wherever you would expect such competencies frameworks to be created. So it's that chicken and egg question, I suppose. Where do we start? Do we have to have clearly defined posts first, or do we need to start with training programs? Do we need to start with competencies frameworks?
Well, I remember a conference in Munich last year, and maybe I'm wrong, but I was thinking that on the level of schools of applied sciences in the field of study programs dealing with the future stuff of a library, there are already some ideas to integrate part of these new skills in the existing curriculum. But I don't know whether there is already a totally new program, because if you start a new study program, the students will ask for what at the end is the area where I shall or might work in the future. And the more you combine the classical idea of a librarian with the IT skills, the threshold to move into this new program might be at the beginning quite high. So it's you have to look for new target groups. So if you are still fishing in the classical area of the librarians, this was my experience in Munich. A lot of there were some practitioners and some young women already working in libraries, and they said, yeah, okay, at the beginning of my study program, I already knew that there will be a position in the public library in, let's say, Regensburg, and I will be A9 or A10, and that's a good thing. So that's the classical structure, and this target or this light at the horizon, yeah, you do not have if you start with a totally new study program. So you really need innovators, pioneers, people who are risky, and that's the challenge.
Yes, I think the jobs are principally already here. And there are also training programs like I already mentioned this Certificate of Advanced Studies at University of Zurich about data management and new technologies. So it's made for this kind of subject librarian or kind of academic librarian that wants to go deeper into this. It's a first step, I guess. And as far as I see, also in the regular training programs, everybody tries to involve these new developments, but it's not already a completely new profile there. So it has to go hand in hand. I think we need to create jobs. We need to offer training programs, and I think that would be the first steps. Yeah.
Now we've been talking in particular about attracting new, junior scientists, junior researchers into positions in libraries or data centers and the like. That means people with a PhD or whatever in a discipline whom we need to train up to work in systematic searching or research data management. And there's certainly a lack of specialist programs for that. You know, we've got quite a few medical librarians here in the audience. There is no specialist program yet for medical librarians. When I was still in Bern and built up a new department, recruited eventually a young neuroscientist, you know, we had to organize one-on-one training for her for half a year because there was no program that she could have followed. How do we resolve this? Shall we ask the library and information scientist, Jill? You need to unmute.
Trying to. The mouse was playing up. Sorry about that. Again, in the Antipodes, in Australia, things are a little different. Many people, probably 60% of librarians come in as a second or third or fourth career. They don't study librarianship straight from school. So the people you're attracting into the profession very often do have postgraduate qualifications in any discipline, absolutely any discipline. So as an academic teaching that sort of program, you might have nurses and teachers and bioscientists and physicists, all sorts of things. And so therefore, they're in that prime position that they're gaining the library technical skills, if you like, and they build that on top of what they've got from their earlier career. So the research intensive universities tend to employ people who are already highly qualified with a PhD, for example, in the discipline that's required to provide that research support. So yeah, we're halfway there in that sort of situation. So that's been the experience here. But it's the library profession in Australia, as a result of this, is very, very highly qualified. I've just completed a study of public library staff in the state of Victoria, and we found that 2/3 of those public library staff had an academic qualification, and almost half of them were at postgraduate level. And they were mostly arguing that they weren't being stretched enough in the public library situation, you know, that they felt they could be doing more than they were actually asked to do, that it was too mundane. So we're probably not comparing apples with apples in this sort of situation. But that's the situation here. But equally well, we've gone the immersion route for librarians who need to skill up in the research data area. The library is seen as a partner with the research office, with the graduate school, with all the different sort of research focused areas of the university. Where it's a collaboration, and so very often it starts with a secondment from somebody in the library into the research office, specifically to look at one particular aspect of how the relationship can then be built further as well. And then that leads to job swaps and all sorts of things. So we're probably a bit more fluid, I'd say, in our career structures than you might be in Europe.
Michael?
Yeah, this is definitely a good idea, Jill. And Joan Bartlett again gave a good recommendation. She was writing that the Information Studies program at McGill in Canada has introduced these skills in an already existing study program. So if we make the study programs more flexible in this way, it might be a good starting point for bringing the idea of embeddedness more further, because let's say there's someone in the German language department and he is additionally an expert in some of the skills we are discussing here, then he might be a good candidate for a library that is in charge of all the additional services that this discipline will need in the future. That this is one idea we can bring more further. And then there was the idea of what was it? A library carpentries. Maybe Mrs. Muller or Doris Scherer can explain us what the idea of library carpentries is about.
Please just turn your microphone and camera on. The session is open to everyone now. If you want to explain briefly, Florian.
Yes, I'll try to say a few words. Basically, it's 1 or 2 full days where participants gather, and there's a curricula that is available online. So the organizers adapt the curricula, and the idea is to have the participants develop new skills with specific like the command line, how to use the command line, how to learn how to read or write codes, and yeah, that kind of things. But maybe I'm not the best person to explain, but I went to one and really it was very interesting and something that I could work upon autonomously later on. So it was a great start and feeling that people were here to help and encourage each other. So very collaborative kind of feeling.
Yes, just to add to that, there's 3 components of the carpentries. There's library carpentry, software carpentry, and data carpentry. And the goal ultimately is to have a train-the-trainer model. So it's very much about building foundation skills and then encouraging some of those participants to go on and get certified as an official trainer. And therefore it's sort of a grassroots spreading of the skill sets. So it's not run through a university or anything like that. It's run within the profession.
In Switzerland, the community of academic librarians organized a series of library carpentry workshops now these last months. So it was a kind of an informal further education for librarians.
Sort of the research that I've been doing here in Australia is very much that it's not a one-size-fits-all sort of, you need the formal education. You can have, elements of the formal in education coming into what you're doing, and then informal activities such as carpentries or other different things, and then also communities of practice. And we have things called research bazaars where people can do sort of short courses and just get introduced to lots of different things. So I think it's having a suite of playing cards, and obviously the different disciplines require different types of skill sets as well. So it's, again, one size doesn't fit all. What the digital humanities need is very, very different from what you need in biomedical science, for example. So you need opportunities, and I don't think any university can offer all of those opportunities. It's just not cost effective for the stakeholders at all.
would that be an argument for a more modular design of training programs? You know, we've got a structure with CAS, with certificates of advanced study that could be used to develop modules, possibly as online courses, distance learning courses, that then could be combined and added up towards a formal qualification like an MSc or so. Would that be a way forward?
I would say yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
We already agreed when we tried to organize something. So yes, I agree. A modular system is, of course, because it's so diverse. Yes, modular system. Agree.
I would like to encourage the audience to ask questions or express their thoughts and ideas. Just turn your camera and microphone on if you like, or add to the chat.
May I ask a question to Michael? Were there any reactions to the paper from your council, from the German library community, and what were they? Is there any movement to be seen?
The first reaction was some invitations to the annual conferences of the what's the section 4 in the DBV in Germany. An invitation by DINI, that's an association of IT departments in Germany. I was invited to a conference in Munich, but I wouldn't say that there was a constant discussion on the topics of the paper so far. There had been some reactions. Gerhard Bissels mentioned it at the beginning, that, or in your questions, you mentioned that one of your association was not amused about the attempt to make the libraries more academic. So let's describe it that way. And I understand it, because the library structure in Germany, and I guess in Switzerland, it's nearly equal, or nearly the same. The library structure is very, very different, and the paper is addressing the scientific library and not a public library. But I would say that also public libraries might be in need of doing something more in the IT world.
Yes,
but that's what happened so far. And now we are working on a new paper that is dealing with the role of so-called intermediaries, and the library is also an intermediary in this process. For a long time, the paper was not only a paper about libraries. So when I started in the Hochschulforum Digitalisierung in Germany, that's a higher education forum for the universities and the schools of applied sciences to discuss their digitalization strategies and so on. And when I was asking for why should we talk about libraries too, they in the beginning said, why should we talk about libraries? And then I found this beautiful quote I already mentioned at the beginning: far from libraries being displaced by information technology has moved into libraries. And then they agreed that we should talk about libraries too. And meanwhile, we realized that libraries have at least 3 important goals for the users. That's the search space function. It's the access to all informations you need, and the third one is orientation.
Thank you for the question, Helge. Does anybody else want to put a question? or comment? It's your chance. We've got all these people here. Now is the chance to discuss. Yeah. If there are no questions or contributions to the discussion anymore, yes, let's hope that we make progress in the direction we discussed this morning. We will certainly stay in touch, and I will certainly involve the colleagues in the plans I have for modular courses in areas of librarianship. Thank you very much to all the panelists and to the audience for participating. Thanks for making it from Australia, and to all of you for making it despite your tight schedules. And thank you to the audience for freeing up the time in your morning. Thank you. We will make a recording of the discussion available through the through my university's website, and I will just post the link to the SwissLib and the EHIL mailing lists. So you'll find that next week or so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And let's hope that one day we will be able to look back at the progress we made from this day. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good luck with everything.
Bye-bye.
So, just.
There we go. All right, all gone.